My husband John cheats while I raise our kids, then threatens to tell the courts I use drugs around them if I mention divorce. You're all I have, he says, while I reconnect with my ex, Mike. Can I escape this toxic cycle and find happiness for my children? I am a 27-year-old female who met my now husband, John, a 28-year-old male, through a dating application in late 2016. I will admit that things progressed quite rapidly between us, and within a few months of dating, he moved in with me and my family. I had persuaded my parents to allow him to take the spare room while he got back on his feet. Apart from that, our relationship was relatively normal. However, around mid-2017, I discovered that he was being unfaithful. He had been acting oddly protective of his phone, among other things, which prompted me to snoop. I ended up finding several intimate photographs from his ex-girlfriend saved on his phone. When I confronted him, he deleted them in front of me and insisted that he had simply forgotten about them. Although I did not fully believe him, I chose to let the matter slide. Only a couple of months later, I discovered those photographs saved in a different location on his phone, such as an email account or something similar. When I addressed it again, he broke down in tears, claiming he had a problem and swore he would seek help, basically implying that he was addicted to pornography. I ended our relationship at that point, but after several months of sporadic communication, I found myself back with him. He promised he had learned his lesson and that he had completely erased all images of his ex from his phone, computer, and other devices. At that time in my life, I was more focused on moving out of my family home and becoming independent, so I agreed to find a place together while we attempted to work on our relationship. Unfortunately, that plan fell apart rather quickly. Things seemed fairly stable until I discovered that he had reestablished contact with his ex. I found conversations between them in which they were exchanging intimate photographs and text messages, and I completely lost it. For months, I had been trying to rebuild my trust in him, and he genuinely seemed to be making a positive change. We were both employed steadily, saving money, and appeared to be aligned about our life goals. I had really allowed myself to believe that things would be okay between us, and that I could move past his past mistakes. We broke up once again, but I couldn't leave the apartment since we were still bound by an active lease. We shared our living space, but by that point, I was treating him more like a roommate than a partner. During one of the breaks, John had a few friends over while I was lounging at home. I had dressed appropriately for company, so I felt a bit embarrassed when they arrived. As they passed by me, Brian, one of John's friends, slapped my behind and made a derogatory comment. I was taken aback and looked at John to see if he would intervene. John only laughed and told Brian not to do that. He did not reprimand Brian nor apologize for his behavior. I simply returned to my room, feeling even more hardened toward John. At some point in mid-2018, while still stuck in that lease, John invited his ex into the apartment. I was uncertain how long he and his ex had been in contact or if they had begun a relationship, but I was convinced they had some sort of arrangement. His ex was friendly towards me and eventually brought up the fact that she knew I was bisexual. She asked if I had ever explored that aspect of my identity and suggested that we explore it together. Initially, I was opposed to the idea, but she insisted that she and John were not together, had not slept together, and had no intentions of doing so. Feeling a desperate need for revenge for how much John had hurt me, I decided to go for it. As expected, I spiraled into a cycle of depression, stuck in the apartment with my ex, finding solace in recreational substance use and sleeping with his ex until I felt like a mere shadow of my former self. I tried to convince myself that I was no longer affected by the situation, and that since John and I were no longer a couple, it should not bother me. However, eventually discovering John in bed with his ex broke me even further, even if it did not surprise me at all. Brian, the guy I mentioned earlier, contacted me at some point asking for help with his computer. For context, I am quite proficient with computers and have built a few in my time. I went over to his apartment to assist him. While there, Brian persistently flirted with me, and in a moment of anger and resentment, I made the choice to sleep with him for revenge. Although it did not change anything in hindsight, I cannot bring myself to regret it. By the end of 2018, I reconnected with an old flame, Mike. Mike and I had been on and off during 2016 before John, but the timing had not aligned for us then. At that time, Mike was unemployed, living with family, and not prepared to commit to a full-time relationship. However, now in 2018, he claimed he was ready. We dated for 9 months, and it felt like a dream. During this period, the lease on the apartment John and I were sharing had ended, and I had asked Mike if he would consider moving in together. At that stage, I had not disclosed my past with John to Mike because it did not seem like essential information, especially since John felt more like a stranger to me by then. Mike indicated that it seemed too soon and that finding a place together would be challenging for him. He stated he had poor credit, limited savings, and would not be able to meet the income requirements in our area. I understood, as John and I could only afford our previous place because we had roommates. Hence, I dropped the topic. I contemplated moving back in with my family, But by that time, some of my siblings had returned home due to job losses, and I realized it would only strain my parents further. I agreed to extend another year on the lease but made it clear to John that, since I was in a new relationship, there would be no possibility of reconciliation, despite his continuous attempts to convince me otherwise. By mid-2019, while still dating Mike, I began to scrutinize our relationship. I had always envisioned having children, becoming a stay-at-home mother, and I wanted to know if Mike shared those aspirations. We were 9 months into our relationship, and it seemed appropriate to discuss this. Mike was perfect in many ways. Our personalities complemented each other, our humor intertwined seamlessly. It felt as though we were meant for each other. I desperately wanted us to be on the same page, so I was devastated when he told me that he did not see a scenario where his wife would be a stay-at-home mom. He also expressed uncertainty about what he wanted in life, his career path, and whether he even desired children. Mike is about 7 years older than I am, which made it difficult for me to comprehend that a nearly 30-year-old man had not established his life goals. Prior to that night, I knew he had frequently moved in and out of part-time positions and was still living with family with someone else covering his bills. However, it did not hit me until that conversation that Mike truly would not have been dependable. What if I became pregnant? What if I became homeless? I realized that he would not be someone to take care of me, and it shattered my illusion for a moment. That evening, in a moment of weakness, I slept with John for the first time in a long while. I cannot explain what led me to that decision, but afterward I recognized that between Mike and John, John appeared to be the more stable choice. He had a career now despite being younger than Mike. He had savings and he wanted the same things I did, children, a stay-at-home wife. He wanted to be a provider, which had always been my dream. Mike and I broke up and I reignited my relationship with John. Not long after reconnecting with John, I discovered I was pregnant. I was uncertain whether the child was John's or Mike's. John was aware of this and assured me he would accept the child regardless of paternity. I felt too embarrassed to contact Mike about the situation, so I did not. We continued with the pregnancy, and a few months before my due date in 2020, John and I decided to marry. Our child was born later that year, and it was abundantly clear that John was the father. John and Mike look nothing alike. For instance, John has blonde hair while Mike has dark brown hair, and certain facial features were distinctly prominent in one that the other simply did not possess. For the first year or two of our child's life, John and I devoted ourselves to work. Eventually, we moved back in with my parents to save for a home of our own. My parents took care of our baby whenever both of us were working. Their support alleviated the financial burden of rent and other expenses. By 2022, we were finally able to purchase a house. Our lives were relatively normal until sometime in 2023. It was blissful and even happy. My parents helped me tremendously with the challenges of being a first-time parent. Although it felt lonely at home with just our baby, I appreciated how hard John worked for us, often putting in 8 to 10-hour workdays and returning home to us exhausted. He handed over his paychecks to me so I could allocate funds for our bills, mortgage, and other expenses. He never complained, and I was content to commit my time to nurturing our home, our child, and him. I consistently had meals prepared before his arrival and packed his lunches before he left for work. We had fallen into a routine that seemed to work for both of us. Then he began pressuring me about having threesomes. I continually rejected the idea, no matter how much he insisted that things were becoming monotonous in the bedroom. I argued that we were both tired. He frequently turned me down because he was worn out from work, and I was exhausted from managing a now toddler on my own, not to mention all the babysitting I was doing for my siblings who lived nearby. John would relent for a week or so, then return to pleading. I started feeling suspicious that he was cheating again, possibly seeking out his ex. He vehemently denied this was the case and claimed he had no specific person in mind. He even suggested that I could find a third person myself as long as it was a woman. He wore me down over the next month until I agreed to find someone. I had little to no success finding potential partners on dating apps, which relieved me. I communicated this to John until he finally broke and asked if I could persuade someone to at least let him watch. I felt disgusted by him, yet he promised he would not ask for anything more and that this was all he desired. After some searching, I eventually found someone, although it was not particularly enjoyable for me. The woman ended up proposing that I become her third, with her husband involved. I declined but kept her contact information just in case I changed my mind. We continued down this path for a while, finding women who were comfortable with John watching. I must admit at this point that John is not particularly attractive. Between myself and his ex, he had not successfully slept with any other women. While nobody backed out after seeing John, he definitely could not convince any of these women to let him participate. Eventually, the novelty of our sexual habits faded as he grew tired of merely watching, and our own sex life never picked up again. Following all of this, I thought to snoop through his belongings again, which is how I discovered he had resumed cheating with his ex. When I confronted him, he broke down and admitted he had been unfaithful with her since the day after our wedding 3 years ago. I was utterly devastated. Despite the tensions between us, I never imagined that throughout this time he had been unfaithful. We had built so much together over the past 3 years and had a home and a child. I exploded at him and he kept repeating the same excuses, that he had a problem, would seek help, and would cut her off, insisting it would never happen again. I shut him out and decided to reach out to his ex. I explained that he and I were married now, with children, hoping she might be unaware of his situation. However, she scoffed at me, ridiculing my anger and stating she had no intention of stopping. After that, I engaged in some rather unsavory actions. But to summarize, his ex has blocked him since 2023, and he has not been able to successfully contact her since then. This brings me to 2024. We just welcomed our second child, and things have remained unhappy and strained between us. We came to an agreement to open our relationship for a brief period, allowing us to pursue others, hoping this might help our relationship. During this timeframe, I reconnected with old acquaintances and contacted that one woman to try out the threesome with her husband. At first, it felt wrong, but John made it abundantly clear that he was actively seeking out people, both at work and via dating apps. During this time, I reconnected with Mike, my ex. It felt like we were picking up right where we left off, and during this period, I felt as if I regained a piece of my former self before marriage, before the kids, before all these obligations. I am ashamed to admit it, but I chose not to disclose any of this to him. To this day, Mike is unaware that I am married and have children. There have been occasions when I jokingly asked what he would do if I secretly had children. Would he still want to be with me? He immediately laughed and assured me that absolutely not. Thus, I had my answer. When the month concluded, John and I decided to close the relationship once more. He admitted that he had not managed to be with anyone. During that conversation, he mentioned he would be okay with me continuing to hook up with women if it would satisfy an itch he could not fulfill. I agreed to this but had no real intention of acting on it. Then he was fired from his job, and it emerged that the cause was his sexual harassment of female coworkers. Even prior to our decision to open our relationship, John had relentlessly attempted to flirt with and obtain the phone numbers of his female colleagues, which had ultimately led to them quitting. One coworker finally mustered the courage to report him, resulting in his termination. I was incredulous that he would do such a thing, especially since it jeopardized our family and home. He managed to secure a new job within a couple of months, during which we relied on our emergency funds to make ends meet. However, I was so frustrated with him that I decided to continue communicating with Mike. Mike and I had maintained intermittent contact since 2016, including after our 9-month relationship in 2018-2019. It was evident to me that Mike would not and could not support my children even if he were aware of them. He was still switching between part-time jobs and was still living with family. Nonetheless, he provided me with emotional support and reminded me of simpler times, of a simpler version of myself. It felt better to talk to him than to try and find any emotional connection with my husband. Things escalated until Mike and I finally met up for physical encounters, typically in one of our cars. I made excuses about not having my own place, explaining that I had a roommate and lacked privacy, and he accepted that reasoning without question. Toward the end of the year, we arranged to meet at a hotel. We spent the night together, had dinner, and behaved as if we were living together. I told John I was meeting a girlfriend and staying overnight due to drinking. I suspect he may not have believed me but did not prevent me from going. This was the last night Mike and I spent together. He ghosted me the following day after we parted ways. He blocked me on everything and did not return my calls or messages until recently. He explained that he had ghosted me because he became frightened by how perfect the night had been and could not bear the thought of returning to our previously clandestine encounters in our cars. I was unsure how to interpret that. For a brief moment, I wondered if he knew about the affair. However, I assured him repeatedly that this was not the case. I am grappling with the reality that my marriage was over even before it began, and that I made a mistake by choosing to be with John over Mike. I cannot bring myself to regret my children, as they are the lights of my life, but I cannot continue in this manner. I have broached the subject of divorce with John several times. We have engaged in conversations in which I pleaded with him to be more emotionally available prior to uncovering his infidelity. He works a lot, and I have always understood that, but he is rarely present for our children, infrequently engages in parenting outside of occasional playtime, and hardly conveys anything to me beyond sharing amusing videos or complaining about work. I have suggested that I return to work. However, childcare expenses are substantial, and he insists it is unnecessary. I am beginning to realize that he has essentially allowed me to become financially dependent on him. While I acknowledge I asked for this arrangement when we first married, it has made it impossible for me to contribute or gain any financial independence. When I mention divorce, John becomes extremely agitated. He claims he will never find love again because women do not find him appealing and that I am the best he will ever do. When I press further, he threatens to tell the courts that I have a substance abuse problem and use drugs around our children. I do not engage in this behavior, but it effectively silences me. I could never risk losing my children, they are everything to me. I have spoken to my parents and their responses have been mixed. My father supports my moving back home, promising to do whatever he can for my kids, emphasizing that I can focus on getting back on my feet and building my savings. However, my mother is already stretched thin from supporting my siblings during their own hardships and insists that I should work things out with John. I have, of course, not disclosed the full story to them. All they are aware of is that I am unhappy. I do not know what to do. I am caught between attempting to persuade John to reopen our marriage or proceeding with a divorce. If I choose to instigate the divorce, there are numerous safety nets I would need to construct beforehand. I ponder whether I should wait until my older child is enrolled in school, which should occur in the next year before I commence my job search. But then what? Would I be uprooting my children from everything they know? All their needs are met. John provides for us without complaint and ensures our children are spoiled with toys and clothes. How could I take them away from this? Any advice is appreciated. In summary, my husband is a serial cheater, and this pattern has continued even after marriage and children, leading me to begin my own extramarital affairs, and I am filled with guilt over it.